Opening the first episode with baby John getting groomed by his father to become the next Green Lantern is a bold choice. Even before he's on screen, we're shown he's abusive. John's brothers are terrified of him showing up and catching them. Is it past their bedtime? Does he not like his sons idolizing a space cop? We don't know, and it doesn't matter, because the punishment is the same. He forces John to put an apple on his head and then shoots it. John's lack of reaction, and the bullet holes behind him, show just how often his father does this. He then praises John for not showing fear, a common abuse tactic. We cut to 2016, where Hal is several weeks late to pick up John for training, and they have some mentor-mentee heart-to-heart.
How come it is every time you say sir, it sounds more and more like fuck you?
I have no idea. Sir.
Yeah, that's right, John. Get your licks in where you can. Anyway, Hal resents training his replacement very, very much. Going from belittling John and telling him he's not ready to wear the ring 1 minute to literally risking his life in some dumbass test because he doesn't immediately grab the ring.
The big blue bosses may think that you're hot shit, but you're just a fucking substitute teacher, Junior.
And does anyone else feel like calling a grown-ass man Junior is racially charged? After not dying, John calls his father to vent about almost being killed on a whim. Justifiably so. Showing the audience that John doesn't realize that what his dad put him through isn't okay. And what is his dad's response to learning that Hal sent his son off a cliff?
They're allowed to have tantrums, we're not.
Which is definitely racially charged. Respectability politics or not, if a black character did that to a white one, the fandom would not be so forgiving. I do want to mention, though, white writers have this bad habit of making all the black fathers abusive or otherwise terrible. That they made this decision for reasons doesn't make this trope any less racist. Cutting to the first murder scene, there's several things happening here, but I want to focus on Hal's supposed respect for jurisdiction. It's a social mask. Hal doesn't actually respect the sheriff. Not for ACAB reasons, but for is an asshole reasons. He just pretends to, as long as he thinks that will get him an interrogation with the suspect. When it doesn't, Hal has the genius plan of getting himself arrested. And spends the night in the closet. There's a joke in there somewhere. We get more of Hal's arrogance when he antagonizes the judge. As a reward, he gets bail set to $200,000 and is bailed out by the sheriff's lawyer husband, or technically, her father-in-law. Hal's back and forth with the lawyer is funny, but having a defense lawyer working for what is basically a small-town mob boss reeks of propaganda. I liked the lawyer character before learning who his boss was, partly because defense lawyers are so vilified in media. Don't come for me, Daredevil fans. You know Matt Murdock is an outlier and should not have been counted. But yeah, the militia guy, no, I will not be learning his name, turns out to be a fantasy racist. Shocker. That thinks he and Hal are on the same page. He calls himself a student of history because he knows which indigenous people the land his ranch is on was stolen from. But he's not actually interested in righting any of those wrongs. Hell, the way he talks about them makes it seem like the Kiowa and Sioux aren't around anymore, which is not true.
How about we both want to protect the planet from anybody not born on it?
And there it is. The xenophobia, the projection, the idea because his people genocided the indigenous inhabitants of his fancy compound, obviously other people would do the same to him if they had the chance. I've been giving Hal a hard time the whole video, not like he doesn't deserve it, but anyway. I do like that he pushes back against Militia Guy's unsubstantiated paranoia about other worlds, describing the galaxy as pretty peaceful, which, to me, doesn't sound like there's no wars, but that wars are rare, and most alien races have no interest in invading their neighbors. Even in Superman 2025, Clark's Kryptonian parents were outliers. Most Kryptonians had no interest in taking over other worlds. The only reason the elves were like that is because their planet was literally exploding and they let fear guide their actions. Two things about Hal's interrogation. First, tripping up the alien by asking about random trivia not related to his cover as a sports fan is very clever. Second, someone is trying to whitewash the Harry Potter franchise before the new series comes out. Referencing Harry Potter without mentioning that Joanne Rowling is using the money she gets from that franchise to fund transphobic and misogynistic policies in the UK is incredibly irresponsible. Yes, Joanne is also a misogynist. You don't get to harass women online and in real life and call yourself a feminist. That's not how that works. Setting that aside, I do like how they play coy about whether or not the suspect is actually an alien until he explodes. That tension between could be supernatural, could be mundane, I just eat that shit up. And Hal is so fucking smug about being right, even though there's a giant hole in the building. Perfect characterization, 10 out of 10. We then jump to the present, and that's when it's revealed that the show is a murder mystery. Well, not just any murder. John is solving the murder of Hal Jordan. And that was episode 1 of Lanterns. A slow start, but I'm definitely intrigued. I know the alien exploded rather than reveal his secrets to space cops, which, mood. But I'm really hoping Militia Guy isn't actually right about the alien invasion. A gun nut racist with delusions of grandeur being right about the illegal aliens? In 2026? That is the most tone-deaf route they could take with this, so I am tentatively hopeful that they won't do that. Also hoping the writers are skilled enough to navigate the racial tension because goddamn. Is it bad that I totally thought the opening for episode 2 was a flashback to John and his dad? That's how much the water bucket affected me. Hal continues to be a terrible teacher, but John getting all serious before failing to take off did startle a laugh out of me. Instead of flying, John manifests a small bird, which flaps its wings and tweets just like a real one. And honestly, the bird construct is the first time John's genuinely smiled. The joy on his face is infectious. Despite Hal using his poor planning as an excuse to get rid of John, making him maintain the bird is still a pretty good lesson, I guess. Anyway, while John is fetching his lantern, Hal is puzzling out how the militia knew the 4 dead bodies from last episode were aliens. By stealing their corpses and dragging them through the metal detector at the football field, which is actually an alien detector. I do wonder why those 4 could be detected, but the guy who exploded wasn't. If they're part of the same faction, shouldn't they have access to the same technology? But at least the characters also wonder about that. Because apparently, the sheriff also knew her father-in-law had alien detectors. That, plus the lawyer showing up to politely ask Hal to get lost now that the last suspect is dead, makes Hal a teensy bit suspicious. So, in classic Hal Jordan fashion, he decides confronting a man with his own private army on said man's own private land and accusing him of working with an alien benefactor is a good idea. All while bluffing that his zero-charge ring can protect him from the sniper aiming at his and Hal's shot. You know, with that mouth on him, I'm surprised this isn't a regular occurrence. Meanwhile, John gets kidnapped. That's probably not a good thing.
Did you tie me up to ask me questions about my fucking bird?
No, I tied you up to ask you about manhunters.
Well, fuck. The leader of the aliens explains to John that manhunters are machines capable of disguising themselves as part of the species they infiltrate, using their advanced technology to follow a brutal sense of justice in order to stamp out chaos. And that supposed justice led to the extinction of entire species. which means these aliens are from a really old civilization, because the manhunter they're following engineered a holocaust after the rest of his kind disappeared. They don't trust Hal Jordan because a Green Lantern took the manhunter into custody, and instead of being executed, it's here, on Earth. That's why they want to recruit John. That's why they inject the memories of their genocide into his mind. That's why they threaten to release multiple explosions and level half the state to make sure the manhunter is dead. This is fascinating lore, because they don't know where the manhunters come from, only that the Green Lanterns act suspiciously around them and that they vanished before the formation of the Corps. But we do. Anyone who's ever heard of manhunters knows. They were made by the Guardians of the Universe. The history could be condensed, since in the comics the Manhunter genocide happened billions of years ago, but the way the leader talks about Manhunters implies that in this continuity there was no glitch that made the Manhunters genocidal. They were always like that, wiping out entire species if they judged them lacking. And just like in the comics, the Guardians hid their involvement with the Manhunter genocide, erasing it from their history books and hoping the other races would forget. How else could they hold on to the illusion of being the only ones worthy of dispensing justice on a universal scale? When the leader asks John if he's ever been deceived by someone he loves, it sounds personal, like he was there. Which makes sense if the manhunter they're looking for is the same one that killed Abin Sur. Hal survives his gunshot wound, and because he was trespassing, that means they had every right to shoot him with a military-grade sniper rifle. Yay! I don't know why they let him go after being shot. Seems like something you'd stay in the hospital for overnight, but whatever. Boo! Stop making me sympathize with the cop. The sheriff says that Halness is making it difficult for her to keep the town together, undermining her position with the townspeople. And also that antagonizing her father-in-law is a bad idea, which, yeah, anyone who's not an idiot could have told you that. So they come to an understanding of sorts. There's also this weird detail where Hal is the only patient in the hospital and the medical equipment looks brand new. Adding that to my conspiracy board. John is back in town and he's pretty out of it, because of the memories of death implanted into his brain. He runs into Militiaman's wife again, who he slept with in the last episode. Okay, Hal being impressed is a little funny, but the only time he praises John is for sleeping with another man's wife. That doesn't feel a little unhealthy to anyone? John's conversation with Zoe is very interesting because she says she loves her husband, but she also takes breaks from him in the form of sleeping with strangers. His white man nonsense is grating at times, but she also chose to be with him because he's rich and she loves him. Plus, he tolerates her indiscretions despite implying he doesn't approve of them because he loves her back. Militiaman doesn't strike me as the type of person who lets other men sleep with his wife. Unless he gets something out of it. And the way she talks about him does make it seem like he views her as a trophy, regardless of her going into the relationship with eyes wide open. Because, besides John, she's the only non-white person in this whole town. John brings Hal his lantern, and for a second it seems like he's not going to tell Hal anything, before asking about manhunters and spilling everything about his captors, making sure to stress how much they don't trust Hal. But before going to sleep, John also calls out Hal for not saying anything about the bird construct. It's followed John all day, even pecking at his attackers in an attempt to protect him, but Hal never even mentioned how advanced the living construct is. And when Hal finally asks about it, John unmakes it, which means it's definitely something to do with his father. Hal uses his recharged ring to fly off planet to what I assume is Oa, so he can ask an imprisoned Sinestro what he knows about manhunters. Which means that even a veteran like Hal only knows so much about them. And the fact that he's asking Sinestro and not one of the other Green Lanterns implies that knowledge about the Manhunters is heavily controlled by the Guardians. Okay, I think at this point it's obvious that Militiaman's secret benefactor is the Manhunter, probably lying to him about the origin of his advanced technology, which so far has only been used to protect himself from detection, using Militiaman's paranoia as a useful tool while he prepares to do to Earth what he did to the aliens' homeworld. Also, I'm calling bullshit on the story for the dead aliens. They were only there for their cover and to find the Manhunter. They wouldn't have started firing just because of a game, which means the militiamen are lying. They probably antagonized the aliens who drew their weapons in self-defense. And once they did that, well, the militiamen were only protecting themselves, right? They could have gotten kids hurt. They're lucky no one else is dead. And if I'm right, their operation is a lot sloppier than they let on. This episode was a lot more fun than the first one, partly because Hal is more asshole entertaining and less asshole annoying, and partly because we're actually getting some answers to the mystery. We know what the threat is, but we don't know where it is or who it is. We don't even know if the Manhunter is responsible for killing Hal in 2026, or if it's a new threat. We don't even know how fascist they're going to go with the Guardians' cover-up of the Manhunter genocide. Which is the plotline I'm most excited for. The last time they adapted that storyline, it was in Green Lantern, the animated series. And as good as that show was, it did still let the Guardians off the hook a bit too easily. Can't believe I'm saying this. Hopefully, the live-action version will be able to deliver on the implications of the Manhunter genocide, the way media snobs always said animation can't. Well, now's your chance to prove it. And that was episode 2. And 1. It took a little longer than I realized to finish editing for episode 1, so I just put them into the same video. I might do the same thing for the next few episodes. We'll see how this one does. But anyway, what do you think? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.